Welcome to the Natural Podcast of Selborne, hosted by Gilbert White's House and Gardens. I am Kimberley James, I'm the collection manager here at Gilbert White's House, and I love Gilbert White. But I wish I knew a little bit more about the natural world he describes, so every fortnight we are taking a deep dive into White's pioneering 1789 book, The Natural History of Selborne, to learn more about the natural world, both in the 18th century and today. We'll talk to some amazing experts and all become a little more Gilbert.
The parish of Selborne lies in the extreme eastern corner of the county of Hampshire, bordering on the county of Sussex and not far from the county of Surrey, is about 50 miles southwest of London in latitude 51 and near midway between the towns of Alton and Petersfield.
Hello and welcome to our second episode. Today we are delving into our first letter addressed to the naturalist Thomas Pennant, but in reality this was not a letter that Gilbert White ever sent. This letter is the first of 8 letters which were written by White for us, the readers, to gain some context for the rest of the book. The letter is a description of Selborne, the village where we are right now, where Gilbert lived for most of his life and where he studied the natural world. It is still a place beloved by those who love nature, not just because of the links with Gilbert White, but because still to this day it is a wonderful place to come and experience the natural world. This letter describes the Selborne Hanger, which is a wooded hill that trees literally hang off, which you can see, or maybe just behind me out of the window here. He describes the location of the village, how we are midway between the towns of Alton and Petersfield, and close to both the Surrey and the Sussex borders. He describes the South Downs, or the Sussex Downs as he calls them, as a vast mountainous range. Now, I probably wouldn't describe the South Downs myself as a vast mountainous range, but you do get the feeling of how important it was for White for you to be able to see the village of Selborne in your mind's eye and to have as much information as possible as we go forward into the more minutiae of the book. With Selborne in mind, today our guest is Chris Piper. Chris is a long-serving volunteer at the museum. He works with the garden team, principally with the plant sales, but he can also be found recording butterflies, leading monthly moth nights, particularly in the summer months, and hosting dawn chorus walks. He is a member of what seems to me almost every local nature group around, and has conducted surveys more widely in the area for the Selborne Landscape Partnership. He is my go-to for nature information, so let's bring him on.
The high part to the southwest consists of a vast hill of chalk rising 300 feet above the village, and is divided into a sheep down, the high wood, and a long hanging wood called the hanger. The covert of this eminence is altogether beech, the most lovely of all forest trees.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for coming out from the garden and into, well, we were going to say the warmth of the house, but not quite today. So today we're talking about Selborne, really, and Gilbert White's first letter. So why do you think Selborne's so special for naturalists?
Well, I think it is to some extent a venue, a destination for naturalists because of Gilbert White.
Yeah.
But it is also special in the sense of the landscape around it. It is, of course, very different to Gilbert White's day, but there are characteristics which exist, particularly in the kind of existence of the hanger and the surrounding countryside, which are very attractive to those that like quiet countryside, so to speak.
So it isn't just the Gilbert White connection, you think, that brings people here?
I wouldn't have thought so. And when I work in the garden and encounter visitors to the house, never ceases to surprise me how few people have heard of Gilbert White before coming here, which is astonishing, really. Naturalists, of course, would talk about being influenced at a very young age by reading the book, but there is nevertheless visitors who are seeing it or encountering it for the first time, which is really quite interesting.
And the place has been a pilgrimage for naturalists for hundreds of years. We know that Darwin came here because he wanted to see white Selborne, and many other naturalists through the 19th and 20th century have sort of said the same. So I definitely think there is something about naturalists coming here because of Gilbert White, but I do think, like you say, that a lot of people come here not knowing who Gilbert White and are still awestruck by the landscape and the quietness, exactly what you're saying, of the nature, despite the fact that obviously the other side of the house is a very busy main road, which would not have been there in Gilbert White's time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying that, or it should go without saying that it's observing nature nowadays is much more challenging and different to Gilbert White, and there's no question that we've lost a lot of biodiversity. Some of that would happen naturally over eras and decades and hundreds of years and so on, but I suspect more recently, in the last 50 years or so, the pace at which that's happened is quickened somewhat devastatingly. And to a degree one can get very downbeat about it. But the fact is that you can be also positive about it, and we can do positive things about it. Gilbert White watched narrowly, and if you watch narrowly in Selborne today, you can see some remarkable things. Maybe not quite the extent, the quantity, or the range of what he saw in the 18th century, but nevertheless, there are some things still happening here which are very reminiscent of what was being described then.
Well, that brings me quite nicely onto some of the projects that you've been involved in. So you always seem to be involved in some sort of, recording or, taking people on, nature walks around. Do you want to? So what are your highlights of some of the things that you've done since
it's an interesting point, this, really, because I struggle a bit with the idea that is often posited, which I'll put forward, that nature is there for our benefit. I prefer to kind of work with people and work with nature to the extent of just exist with it. It's not to say you can't enjoy it, but to regard it as simply something that's there for our benefit is somewhat limiting, I think. To that extent, certainly since I've had more time, I've regarded so-called citizen science and recording as an important part of understanding the change that's occurring in the natural environment. And so firstly and principally, the biggest contribution I've made probably is to the Selborne Landscape Partnership, the farming cluster in which the museum and the house sits, which has been a remarkable period, certainly over 5 years, culminating in the 2003 report. We recorded a considerable range of species and learnt a lot about what was present in the environment, including, just ahead of the project, of course, the kind of widespread existence of harvest mice.
Well, that was very early on in the partnership's sort of, well, at least my knowledge of the partnership's work.
Early 90s or something, wasn't it?
But there was a news story, maybe it was 2016, so I hadn't long been here, about the harvest mouse returning. That was how it was put in the press anyway, returning to Selborne. And I suppose for context for the listeners, Gilbert White in the Natural History of Selborne was one of the first to describe the harvest mouse as a separate species. So we've always had a sort of a strong link and kinship with the harvest mouse. So this project was specifically around trying to boost the population of harvest mice in the area, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of people I encounter when I'm on my walks around Selborne appear more to be in a hurry and less inclined to stand still and look. And I suspect what has resulted is the fact that we've missed a lot, which has been present all the time.
Yeah.
So to talk about things returning is somewhat misleading.
Yeah,
I mean, we've just completed a reasonably comprehensive project surveying bats. I mean, part of this, of course, is new technology available to us, but I've been astonished by the quantity and to a degree the range across the landscape of species which probably weren't that well recorded before we undertook this exercise. And it's been, one can't get away from the fact that there are fewer around.
Yeah.
And of course the nocturnal bat is one of the more common. The nocturnal bat that Gilbert White first described as one of the more common, but we were also finding in certain aspects of the landscape other species which I didn't know was quite so evident or widespread. Now some of this may well be to do with the fact that we've improved the environment. I remember reading kind of introductions to mid-century, possibly a bit later, versions of the Natural History where the writer has kind of been fairly critical of the evolution of the agricultural environment, moving away from hedgerows to prairies for arable, for example. Now, I mean, there is no question that more recently some of the hedgerows have come back intentionally, and some of the interventions that have been done by the farmers has gone so far as to improve prospects for pollinators and for insects, and consequently you will get a recovery of the species that depend on that.
That's great. I mean, so really it's the fact that we are watching narrowly, to use Gilbert White's, phrasing, that we are seeing more, but also, to do with our maintenance and, our methods. So hopefully that's making a difference to what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my view is the more you understand the impact of what we now call the Anthropocene, the better we're able to do something about it. And I think, great minds like David Attenborough would say we can do something about it. And the more we understand about the impact of humans on the natural environment, the more likely we are to get a positive result.
Speaking of positive results, tell me a little bit about the Hare Street Butterfly project, because I know that's one that's very
Well, that's a specific example where certainly when I started studying and collecting butterfly records, it was regarded as at the very least a vulnerable species, if not a rare species. Hair streaks generally are very difficult to observe because of the nature in which they breed and so on. What we discovered, we being scientists and citizen scientists, is that the nature in which they breed with requiring ash trees and lay eggs requiring young blackthorn was affected by the introduction of mechanisation, which allowed effectively those managing the countryside to cut their hedges every year very efficiently. What they hadn't realised probably at the time is they were destroying the habitat of at least one species in doing so.
They're very particular, aren't they, about where they lay their eggs?
Well, it is said that the female prefers 1 to 3 year old young blackthorn, which isn't very difficult to create because it's a kind of a pervasive hedgerow species. But if you use mechanisation to remove it, then you can do it quite efficiently. Through the introduction of rotation, and the the prescription is probably one patch every 3 years, it's allowed the recovery of the butterfly. And then certainly when we were studying it in the early 20s, we were finding evidence of eggs, which is the best way to observe that butterfly, from Chorlton and Alton all the way down to Blackmore and Emshot, i.e. across the whole environment. Simply by changing the way you manage the blackthorn hedgerow, you will allow the recovery of the butterfly. And it still delights me every year when I go looking at our own hedgerows, which I manage in that way, or I encourage the management of the hedgerows in that way, to see the female. Yeah. And that fantastic time last year, I think, when I was able to video a female laying eggs on young blackthorn.
Which is incredible. I mean, you are a fantastic photographer anyway, but having that footage of laying the eggs. I mean, the eggs, it's so small.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible that you spotted it and were able to, to get such good footage. I
mean, the other thing I would say is there is evidence, I think. I mean, it's anecdotal, but the species adapt. So, for one reason or another, there's generations of brown hairstreak that lay eggs halfway up the zigzag path on blackthorn, which isn't managed to the typical prescription. Yeah. And I go there every year, as I have done this year, and I see the eggs, and I think it's marvellous that they that continues. It's a tribute to the flexibility of the butterfly. And similarly, near Nor Hill, you will see males displaying around beech trees, and I have seen that. And that's contrary to what the textbook would lead you to believe. I don't know how widespread that is, but it's a irrefutable fact, because it's not only me seeing it.
Well, that's very interesting. And I find the idea of them sort of, developing their behaviour, to try and, survive is, really nice, because hopeful that, we will have.
Species adapt, and some species quite evidently find it easier than others.
Yes,
and then, one of the reasons I study moths in addition to butterflies is there's more choice and more and more chance of finding change going on, because you've got a wider selection of species to look at. But even in butterflies, we've had evidence in the garden here of brown argus changing its food plant, which certainly caught me by surprise, but then I found out it is clearly the case elsewhere as well. And it's a species now which we observe out in the meadow pretty much every year.
Amazing. And I mean, I know from personal experience, I mean, my knowledge of moths is small anyway, but I mean, had you asked me maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago, my knowledge of a moth was a small brown thing that, gets stuck in your bathroom, or, but going on one of your moth nights particularly really opened my eyes to just how many species of moths that we have here, how beautiful a lot of them are, how huge some of them are, and I think it's such a valuable thing for people to be able to do, is to come on something like a moth night and really see these beautiful creatures up close and get a really much better understanding and appreciation for something that I think not everybody loves a moth, but I've learned to love moths.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing for me is that they're quite a critical indicator species of change, and they're also quite a useful way of illustrating to those that have yet to come across it the fact that everything is connected. And so For example, if you use pesticides or herbicides, you're not only taking out the plant, but you're taking out the species that depend on the plant, and you're taking out the species which depend on the species which are taken. So this web is very easily kind of influenced by a simple intervention in one particular aspect. I mean, the other characteristics of change which you observe in moths is increasing migratory habits and observations of species moving geographically, adapting to average temperature changes. It's pretty easy to pick up in across the country in terms of the number of moth recorders now engaged with this. So that's one of. I mean, I do enjoy looking at them, and you kind of wince a bit when you think this is just food for bats and food for birds, given how beautiful they are. But I mean, they are in themselves an interesting species, but they are also part of an important whole.
Yeah. Wow, how much more Gilbert White can you
and important pollinators, which
yes,
a lot of people don't quite appreciate. If you think, I mean, they're far more interesting the nearer the equator you get, but even in this country, if you think we've got 49, possibly 50 species of butterflies and 2,500 species of moths, it's
when
quite
you think about it like that, it's insane, isn't it? Because, I mean, people's probably, the general person probably would be able to name more species of butterfly than they would moths.
Yeah, well, most would struggle, to be honest. But yeah. I mean, I think there's opportunities to go out at night and see these things pollinating in as much as there is going out during the day and watching butterflies pollinate. And this is on which our food depends, really.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're integral, aren't they? Well, talking of flowers and the insects which pollinate them, one of the other things is obviously the management of our meadow, and I know that we've had some unusual things crop up in the meadow. I wonder if you could tell us about certain orchids that we've seen.
Yeah, so I'm not a botanist, and I'm very much on the periphery of understanding the subject, but I mean, orchids are an interesting species in themselves, and the extent to which they appear and then disappear for very long periods. So when I first started looking closely in the meadow, there were things like the greater butterfly orchid. Now, I haven't seen that out there now for 3 or 4 years. I would hesitate to say it's lost, and it may well come back. But clearly, grazing habits are an important part of maintaining that species.
But it just goes to show, I mean, what the benefits of recording work and observation, what fantastic, things it can bring, because those flowers could have gone completely unnoticed.
That's right.
I just think the work that you do, both in your capacity as a museum volunteer, but also, more widely with the other organisations that you support, is benefiting all of us, really. So thank you very much. But what was it for you that got you into nature? Is it something that you've always been interested in?
It's quite a difficult question to answer that, really. I mean, I think this comes back to each of our relationship with nature. I mean, I think, I've been around for a long time now, and I was brought up in, semi-urban environment, but with access to coastal habitats and to moorland habitats, which I suspect at the time I took for granted. They're now national parks and geoparks, and we have to protect them rather more than we were evidently protecting them when I was young. But it was undoubtedly having easy access to nature that provoked my interest. I think the problem with some of us is that we choose a working life which excludes everything else, which I undoubtedly did. And it was great with more time to be able to rediscover this interest, really. Opportunities to read, opportunities to relax and take time is a real privilege, you know.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's something that is very true, that the ability to be in nature and have the time in nature and connect with nature is a privilege, but it's something that we all should, you know, be able to have access to, and it's something that we hope, you know, going forward we can, you know, in our small way help with, either by encouraging people to access their local outside spaces or through the work that the Field Study Centre does in sort of, you know, having schools here and having doing nature sessions with schools to try and, you know, maybe spark something with a future generation. But I mean, what you're saying makes me think of Gilbert White, because I do often wonder that had he not grown up in this environment, you know, would he still have been a great naturalist, or would he have just been a country clergyman somewhere in the country but he was really drawn to this area and he kept coming back to this area. But he did have a period in his life where sort of the nature took a backseat. You get the idea that his childhood was full of, you know, spending a day following a bird or observing the natural world, and then he spent, you know, some time appreciating nature but concentrating on his, you know, career as a clergyman. And then as he got older, his love of nature started to trump his love of his day job, and that's where we get the Natural History of Selborne from, you know. And he was in his, you know, he wrote it sort of through his 50s and his 60s and then published it when he was 69. So you know, that sort of time of being able to, you know, be in nature, and the area of Selborne being, you know, where he grew up, because all of his siblings were interested in nature as well, so it was either something genetic or it was, you know, the area that they grew up in.
We travel a lot more nowadays and are able to explore much more widely, including, of course, internationally. But I suspect what might have helped and provoked that interest was the fact that within walking distance of this house, you can find so many different habitats.
Yeah.
I mean, I study heathland, and I can walk to heathland from here, as well as chalk downland, as well as intermediate greensand habitats. You can't do that in a lot of places.
No, and I think that is so true, and that's something that he touches on a little bit in this letter, and then he'll go on in more detail in some of the following letters. But I mean, he even said it in this letter that the road that goes through Selborne is the dividing line between two different soil types, and he sort of describes how easy the soil is to work, which is the gardener in him coming out there, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
But it is true that obviously we have different soil types here, and really within, like you say, within walking distance, White would have been able to experience so many different types of habitat, and, you know, it's really a wide-ranging area, which is, again, going back to our first question, why this area is so appealing to the naturalist. So we touched a little bit on the changes in Selborne between today and when Gilbert White was writing. Do you think he'd recognise the natural world today, or do you think he would be...
Well, I think the only thing he would recognise is probably the topology.
Yeah, really. You know.
I mean, you know, the hangar is there.
Yeah.
But it's very different. The grazing has changed. Local agriculture has changed.
Yeah.
The road is a huge dividing line in more ways than one now, and so I suspect that, you know, I mean, it would be foolish to say he wouldn't recognise it, but I think a huge amount has changed.
Yeah.
Some of it would naturally change over hundreds of years in any case, and I suspect, you know, it changed materially in the 300 years up to when he studied it.
Yeah.
But I think you'd probably struggle to recognise a lot of it. How he'd react is a matter of speculation.
Well, we wouldn't know, would we? We wouldn't know. But it is interesting. And then sometimes when you're reading the natural history, you do get a sense of how different it is. And Gilbert White's diaries, I think, even maybe more his diaries, because it's like a day-by-day play, and you can really see the differences in, particularly now in winter with, his Januaries were, knee-deep in snow and things like that. But it is also nice when you read the Gilbert White's writing and then sort of look outside and sort of can see some similarities to sort of, the plants that are, coming up, and the some of the birdsong, hopefully some of the birdsong. I mean, I'm saying this as somebody who is not.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get very, very downbeat about the birdsong, really, because actually, as we know, at least one species went extinct during his time here, down in Woolmer Forest. But more recently, we've lost a lot of what I would regard as very precious bird species from around the area, and you would read in the kind of 1950s up until the 1970s, and I've been reading diaries of someone from the BBC Natural History unit who walked down the high street in Selborne Common in the 80s, still seeing turtle dove and hearing nightingale. Well, we've lost nightingale at the moment. Turtle dove is hanging on within about 5 miles, but only just. And we certainly lost wood warbler. And these were very special birds at the time, and that's habitat lost. That's just simply the fact that the population has expanded, and in doing so has replaced habitat with habitation. So I think it's easy to get downbeat about it. I mean, only about half an hour ago, though, I was talking about Egyptian geese nesting in the oak tree. Now that I honestly don't know whether that's regarded as on the British list yet, but it's a non-native species which has been introduced, which wouldn't have been around at this time. So these things change. How much of it is natural and how much of it is induced by human behaviour is a matter of opinion. Nevertheless, I think we've lost precious species which you have to go a long way to see now, and maybe gain others. One thing I did discover, particularly during 2020, was that if you just slow down and look more closely, you will find species which you didn't know were on your doorstep.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of this interview, we always ask our guests how they think our listeners can be more Gilbert, but that came from the pandemic, that sort of be more Gilbert phrase, because myself and our education manager Fiona were chatting about how the pandemic had forced us all to be a little bit more Gilbert White. We were all taking our sort of sanctioned local walks and had a much slower sort of day-to-day life. And I know for myself personally, I was visiting areas of the city that I was living in the time that I had never visited to in my 12 years of living there, and taking pictures of butterflies and birds, and we noticed that everybody was getting into their gardens, me included. Everybody sort of was getting a little bit more Gilbert, but it's definitely have you got any ideas of how one can be more Gilbert? I mean, is it literally just taking the time and looking? I've never been one to tell other people how to behave, really. No, of course. It's just,
and I think it's a question of it's a question of taking sensible perspectives on. I mean, the impression that I get is that most would benefit from slowing down.
Yeah.
I mean, having kind of dabbled with social media, and I don't miss the irony there, by the way, but having dabbled with social media, I do wonder whether many would benefit from simply putting their mobile devices down and just looking around them when they go for a walk.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with going for a walk without any accompaniment. So you don't need a dog on a lead or a person. You can enjoy a walk on your own without looking at your phone and just noticing what's around you, really, and just slowing down. I remember it still rests with me, really. I mean, I've just been sorting through my photographs, and I had memories of it. I mean, I think it was a few years ago now, 2016. I was on the coast on the Lizard in Cornwall, and I was utterly amazed that I was staring into, it was spring, and I was staring into a very small piece of habitat, and I saw 10 species of butterfly and moths. And some people walked by with sticks, walking very fast, and said, "Not much around, is there?" And I was kind of going, "Really? Can I just show you something here?" And I think we all have different preferences, but if you wanted to be more Gilbert, just slow down and look.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, yeah.
It's a bit obvious, but...
No, but I don't think it is. And I mean, it's so easy these days to live busy, fast lives, and we're all encouraged to, do as much as we can. And like you say, we're all slightly too attached to our mobile phones and have to always be listening to something, watching something, consuming content of some kind. And I do think there is huge merit in just slowing down, looking. And I think that is Gilbert White in a nutshell. He did have a fairly quiet, slow life that he was able to spend so much time out in nature, and that's what makes him such a fantastic observer and such a fantastic writer when he's describing nature, because he was so connected with nature because he took the time to look.
You don't have to be compulsive with all these distractions.
No.
There are far more around nowadays than it is there, I imagine.
Yes.
Communication was via letter and very slow, so it was the actual pace was more conducive. But that's not to say you can't slow down. I've managed it, I think, probably on the whole.
Yeah.
And I don't feel indolent. It's just that you can do it if it happens to suit you.
I mean, even just and there's something that I think I could probably benefit from, just halfway through the day, heading outside or sitting in your garden for a few minutes and just sort of taking in what you can see. And I think with that, it's probably a good time to say, do finish this podcast, but then after you the podcast, have some no phone time and go out into the world.
Quite, yeah. I mean, bizarrely, I mean, last weekend was dominated by me. These various organisations I'm engaged with, looking at programmes through to next August of organising walks or looking at programmes and walks and events and agreeing timings and so on. The opportunities are there.
And joining a walk or going for on some sort of conservation, there's loads popping up locally to me, conservation groups and dawn chorus walks or winter walks. There's if you look online, if you do pick your phone up and look online, there are places to do it. And if you're local to us, do come and sit out in the garden and enjoy Gilbert White's landscape. So I think with that's a really good place to finish. So thank you so much, Chris.
The cartway of the village divides, in a remarkable manner, two very incongruous soils. To the southwest is a rank clay that requires the labour of years to render it mellow, while the gardens to the northeast and small enclosures behind consist of a warm, forward, crumbling mould called black marl.
Hello, so we're back in the collection, and what I chose for today's episode is this from our picture store, which is a map of Selborne for visitors of Selborne. So this is the sort of thing that would have been on display in the village, very similar, if not exactly the same, that's the one by the church right now. So it shows the High Street. The museum is number 8 here, but it shows you all the different buildings, many of which Gilbert White would have been intimately acquainted with, because most of the buildings along this High Street are exactly the same as they were in Gilbert White's time, and we know who lived in them and who his neighbours were. A lot of information about Gilbert White, and as well as the Oates collection, which is the other part of our museum, but also the landscape, so the hangar and the general layout of the village. And it's this sort of thing that Gilbert White wanted us to appreciate in letter 1, which is why I thought that this would be an appropriate object to match the letter. And this, like all the other objects that we match to our letters, will be on display in the museum for a short time to promote the podcast. So if you're more interested about the object, come and have a look later on.
At each end of the village arises a small rivulet that at the northwest end frequently fails, but the other is a fine perennial spring, little influenced by drought or wet seasons, called Well Head. This breaks out of some high grounds joining to Nor Hill, a noble chalk promontory, remarkable for sending forth 2 streams into 2 different seas.
Thank you so much to Chris for coming out of the garden to speak to us today. If you are interested in volunteering in any capacity, we love our Volunteers Day coming up on the 16th of Feb. It's a very casual coffee morning up at our Field Studies Centre, where you can have a coffee, obviously, or a tea, meet current staff and volunteers, and just learn a little bit more about the opportunities that we have up here. Or if you can't make it, obviously just come to our website. We've got lots of information and contact for you. Also coming up, we have our first online nature talk of the year. These are seasonal online talks, and our winter talk will be on the 20th of January with Dr. Kevin Butt. Kevin came here a year or so ago to conduct a really fascinating study about earthworms, which are one of Gilbert's faves, here in Selborne, in the garden. And it is a really fascinating study and well worth a listen. So do head over to our website, which is gilbertwhiteshouse.org.uk, and find out about all our up and coming events and get tickets. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, review, say hi in the comments, all the things that all helps us. And thank you again to Sophia behind the camera and the editing desk for all of her help. Thank you so much. Bye.